I'm going to talk about a few archaeological discoveries that I write about in my book, The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. The first archaeological discovery I want to talk about is the 2010 discovery of the Denisovans, which is one of our ancient ancestors. And this discovery took place in 2010 in the mountains of Siberia at a cave known as Denisova. And if you can see this picture from my book, it's a huge tooth. And in fact, when the archaeologists first found it, because it was so huge, they thought it was a cave bear. And later they did DNA testing and determined that it was a new ancestor that we had just discovered, and they named them the Denisovans. Also at this cave were found artifacts. There was a greenstone bracelet that had little tiny holes, 8 millimeters in diameter, drilled into the bracelet. And we're talking about a 40,000-year-old artifact. So that's pretty advanced technology going back that far. Recently, there was a discovery in China of a complete Denisovan skull. And I have a replica of it right here. It's a massive skull, football shaped. You can see the front has huge eye sockets. And this skull came out of China, and it's known as Homo longi, which means dragon skull. A Chinese worker was doing construction work, building a bridge in China, and at that particular time in the late 1930s, the Japanese had occupied that area. And the worker uncovered this skull, and he hid it. He put it in a well and hid it. And it wasn't until he was on his deathbed that he revealed to his children that he found the skull and that he had put it in a well and where it was located at. And his kids went and retrieved it, and then they turned it over to the university. So this is quite a new and an amazing discovery, because this here is one of our ancient ancestors, or this is what we're told. So we know about the Neanderthals, and we know that Neanderthals interbred with our ancestors. In fact, most of us will have some Neanderthal DNA, the majority of us, actually. But now with this new discovery of the Denisovans, they're actually finding DNA in some populations, particularly in Papua New Guinea. They found Denisovan DNA. And what's interesting is what little we do know of the Denisovans, they were very large, as you can tell by this skull. It's pretty massive. And some researchers believe that these Denisovans, they reached up to about 7.5 feet in height, average, and that's huge. So these peoples could have been the giants talked about in a lot of ancient cultures, and I write about that in my book. Other archaeological discoveries I talk about are the Flores Hobbits, or the little people of Indonesia. This is an actual casting of the skull that was found in the early 2000s on the Isle of Flores in Indonesia. And when paleontologists and archaeologists first discovered this little skull, they couldn't believe it. It was so small, and they studied the dental work and determined that this female was in her 30s when she died, so it wasn't a child. And originally they thought maybe the person had microcephaly or some other disorder that caused them to be so small, because the skeleton measured just a little over 3 feet. And after analysis and DNA testing, they determined that there was no microcephaly or no other disorder, that this little skeleton was a little person. And since that discovery in the early 2000s, more bones have been found, artifacts have been found from these little people. They call them the Flores Hobbit. They were intelligent. They had a brain that was smaller than a chimpanzee, but they were intelligent. They knew how to make tools. They knew how to make spear points. They knew how to make fire, and the scientists were stunned. So there was a race of little people that walked the earth that wasn't much taller than 3 feet. Now, we don't exactly know when they died off. There's speculation that, maybe it was 40, 50, 60,000 years ago, and some archaeologists believe that they were around, 13,000 years ago. So it's very possible that our ancestors had encountered these little people, and maybe that's where a lot of the stories in the different mythologies and different cultures come from regarding the little people. And I write a lot about them in my book, particularly the North American traditions of the Native American peoples, talking about of these little people and having encounters with them. Another interesting subject I talk about in my book is cranial deformation. And this is a skull from Paracas, Peru. And you can see just how elongated this skull is. And cranial deformation basically means artificially elongating a skull. And they would do it by when the baby was very, very young. When the child was young, they would place a board on the back of the head and they would bind it with cord, and then the head would just naturally kind of elongate. But what's interesting, and I talk about this in my book, is that there are skulls in Peru that are extremely elongated, and paleontologists have looked at some of these skulls and determined that these were not artificially elongated, that they were that way naturally, which is very interesting. If you look on the back of the skull, Homo sapiens have what is called a sagittal suture, which they call the bow and arrow. So it's kind of like a curved line representing the bow, and then there's another line that goes up the middle that looks, they call it like the arrow. And on some of these skulls, it's actually missing the sagittal suture. So it's like they have a different skull structure than Homo sapiens, which is extremely interesting, and I talk about that in my book. I also talk about the Nazca mummies, which gets into a whole other level of the discovery of these ancient mummies that look extraterrestrial. Some of them only have 3 fingers and 3 toes. Some of them look reptilian, and those were first brought to the attention of the public in 2017, and there's been extensive scientific testing, bone scans, DNA testing, and they have not been revealed to be a fraud. And in fact, there's DNA in these mummies that match no known species on this planet. So that's very interesting. So my point in bringing up this video is just to get people thinking. Our history is far more mysterious than we've been told, and it's far more messy. Some people try to put our history in a box, and they think that we know all the answers, but there is a lot that we do not know and that we are still discovering out there. Thank you.